This book has its genesis in email exchanges that I was having with Tony Judt in the months before his death in August of 2010 from Lou Gehrig's disease. He had written a book called Ill Fares the Land, where he talked about distribution of income, uneven distribution of income in the United States, in Great Britain, in the EU. And I was struck reading it partly because he was a Brit, having lived in America for about the same time that I was an American living in Europe. I was struck by the fact that he seemed to be talking to an audience that his authorial voice suggested he believed existed. People who would listen to him, people who would understand the urgency of what he had to say about the way in which poverty was becoming a fact of life for huge numbers of our populations in countries where affluence was thought to be the rule. So I sent him an email and I asked him if he thought the audience he thought he was talking to really existed. And this started a back and forth. Most of the writing and talking, so to speak, was done by me because with his disease, he couldn't engage in long exchanges. But he asked me to continue writing him and sort of updating him on the thinking that I had with respect to the things we were talking about. So through the late spring and much of the summer of 2010, I continued to write four, five, six messages, I think, some of them rather long. And in early August, I sat down literally to write him another message when I opened the New York Times obituary page and discovered that he died. And I was adrift. For weeks after that, I found myself just in a strange kind of vacuum because I had been involved in this very engaging, satisfying conversation with a mind, one of the most superbly honed and at the same time warm and congenial minds that I'd ever encountered. And suddenly, in virtually in mid-sentence, it was over. He was gone. And through almost the end of October, I found myself just grasping for what to do. All of these loose ends that I had expected that we would pursue and maybe tie up at some point were just hanging out there. And so I finally decided, okay, you got to write Tony one last message. You've got to say the things that you would have said, even though he's not there to hear them anymore, and get it out of your system and get some closure. So I sat down to do that, not really knowing where it would lead, but where it led was what today is waiting for something that never arrived. And in the book, I start out as I would have with him, and I deeply regret that I don't have him to try this out on, though I think he would have agreed to a great extent with what I'm saying. I start out saying what we've got to do is look at our premises. We've got to ask ourselves not what to do, but why we do what we do, why we are progressives. And then begin to look at what to do. Because unless we have that substrata of understanding of who we are and what we're about, we'll go nowhere. And my feeling is that that's true of the left in America today, in other parts of the world as well. And quite frankly, I think it's true of the right. And I want to say that I don't exclude the conservative viewpoint from my notion of how things should work. In a real democracy, there's a balance between those things. But we don't have that balance today. What we have is, I think, a frighteningly downward spiral into name calling, into demagoguery, and even hysteria, fueled by external things, to be sure, that keeps both sides from looking at what it is they really stand for and how that makes it possible for them to contribute to a sober, clear-minded discussion, a dialogue, I say in the book, and to evolve some kind of, what's the word? Our discourse is so conflicted these days, it's even difficult to find the words. We need to find some kind of synergy. It's an overused word, but I think it's an appropriate word in our circumstances, whereby we bring the strengths of both a progressive and conservative view to bear on the problems that we face and the problems that we'll continue to face for generation after generation. Now, in the book, I'm talking to progressives, and I would hope that some like-minded conservative might do the same kind of thing, to get away from the harangues, to get away from the Sturm und Drang, and get down to asking ourselves some basic questions about not only what's good for America, because this is not simply an American or a Western or even an industrial democratic question. We're now facing global questions. The questions we ask, the things we do in response to those questions, will have global implications. Every single one of them. And we've got to digest that. Not as some transformational revolutionary moment, but as a clear and present part of what we face. And I say towards the end of the book, this is not something, this isn't one of those short-term political questions that have to do with how we're doing in this election cycle and how many seats this party or that will gain or lose in the next election or the election after that. These are questions that really have world historical significance. And that world historical significance will be experienced, or its outcome will be experienced, not by me, not by the pig in a python baby boomer population that I'm part of, not only in America, but in large parts of the world. It'll be experienced by my children, by Tony's children, and by their children and their children's children. These are things, we are at moments that will have impact for generations to come. And what I've tried to do in the book is lay out some of the reasons that progressives are progressive, and some of the ways in which the attitude that underlies who they are and what they do can make real contributions to what's to come in the future.